Good morning, everyone. Want to welcome you to our program on this Tuesday morning. Hope you're having a great Tuesday so far. Would encourage you, if you have a Bible or have a Bible app, go ahead and open up with us. We're going to be over in Psalm 15. We're going to spend our time there. The goal and the hope is that we will study Psalm 15, which is a really short psalm. There's only 5 verses, but there's a lot compact within those 5 verses for us to really think about and meditate on. And so once we have studied through this, I want to encourage you to take Psalm 15 for the rest of the day or for the rest of the next couple days and give some thought, give some meditation onto what's being said here. And I think that'll be helpful for you. It's a little bit of a rainy day today, but it really is a beautiful day, another wonderful day that God has made. And we appreciate that. Appreciate you being on here this morning. If you have any questions, any comments, please, as we go through here, make sure to make a comment down below. I'll be able to interact, be able to answer, be able to at least give some thought maybe to what your question or your comment. Love to be able to interact. That's one of the things that I love about this program is the ability to be able to interact with each other as we go through here. This is not just my study. I want this to be your study. So please tell me whatever you may be, whatever's on your mind as we're thinking through Psalm 15. Now, just a couple things about this psalm. Psalm 15 is considered an entrance literary, that's how you pronounce it. It was one of the psalms that they would sing as they enter into the tabernacle or into the temple. And so Psalm 15 is also considered to be, which I tell you what, makes sense because of the questions that's asked, who may dwell with God. And in Psalm 15, it's also considered to be a wisdom psalm. It asks the question, who can dwell with God? And then it goes to answer the question. But it's divided into 3 different parts. Number 1, you got the question. Then you have the response or the answers. Then number 3, you have a promise at the end of it. So let's go ahead and spend our time in Psalm 15 and think about some things that's said here, and hopefully we'll benefit from it. So let's look at the very beginning here. We have these questions. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? Seems like a kind of a strange question, isn't it? Because who can abide with God? Who can dwell with God? Well, strange for us to imagine that God would put any kind of limitation on that. It seemed like God would want everyone to be able to do that. And the truth is, no, like he doesn't. He has standards for that. And you can't be close to God. You can't be with God. You can't dwell with God just because you decide you're going to. That's kind of the point of the psalm. In fact, if you remember back in Psalm 5, he talked about who cannot dwell with him. So there's those who can, as we're in Psalm 15. There's those who cannot. Psalm 5, we'll look at that a little bit closer here in a second. But the Bible affirms that not everyone can be in God's presence. In fact, there's some dangers to that. There were limitations on who can touch sacred things. In Numbers 4, verse 15, he says, they shall not touch any of the holy things lest they die. In verse 20, he says, they shall not go in and watch while the holy things are being covered lest they die. Like they couldn't go look at and start touching around on the holy objects because they would die. That's how special these holy objects were. They couldn't be touched. In fact, they're very sacred, like the Ark of the Covenant and these other objects. And you remember a man by the name of Uzzah? Remember the donkey or the oxen stumbled as they had it on the cart, and it begins to fall, and Uzzah just simply reached out and he touched it and he died right there. You know, there was some standards put on whether you could touch or whether you could associate with God with these things. And so God put some limitations on it. And it honestly, if that was me, like if I'd been sitting there watching Uzzah, like reach out to steady the ark so it didn't fall and break into a million pieces, I probably would have thought, wow, he's a hero. But no, like God needs to be considered to be holy. His presence does, and so does the things that would be in his presence, like the ark. And so these are some relevant questions. Who can dwell? Who can abide with God? Because not everybody can. And remember, I mentioned Psalm 5, 4 and 5. It says, for you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor shall evil dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand in your sight, and you hate all workers of iniquity. These are people who cannot dwell with God because of their lies and their iniquity. because they didn't measure up to the standards and the requirements that God has established for being close to him. In Psalm 23 or Psalm 24, verses 3 and 4, he says, "Who may ascend to the holy hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy presence? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, he who has not lifted up his soul to an idol nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive blessings from the Lord and the righteous from the Lord of his salvation." There are standards. Not just everybody could come into the presence of the Lord. It's not an uncommon question throughout the Old Testament of who can dwell with God, right? And so we see that in other places like Isaiah 33 and other places. That was a good question. It's a good question. Who can dwell there? And think about how this works with the temple. Think about the way that it works. You have this idea that the closer you get to God, the more restrictive things become. You have the planet, which has not been fully disconnected from God and his presence, but you have the planet. Then you have the special small nation of Israel, God's own special possession. Then you have Jerusalem, God's special city. Then you have Mount Zion as God's special mountain in Jerusalem. Then you have the country. You have the courtyard for the Gentiles, which is as close as the Gentiles could go to the presence of God. Then you have the courtyard for the women, courtyard for the men. Then you have the courtyard where only the priest and the Levites could enter in. You have the temple sanctuary, which only special priests could enter in certain times of the year. And then you have the holiest of holies, where only the high priest could enter in once a year. And so what is that telling us? Well, the closer you get to God, the more holy and special that it is. The closer you get to God, the greater the restrictions and the standards become. And so imagine trying to, like, I don't know, get access to the president, President Trump, whether you like him or don't like him. Like the dress and the hygiene, the modesty and the decorum and the adequate and the manners and how you address them and how you greet them. You think about the king and queen over in Israel, or excuse me, over in England. Everything changes the closer you get to them. It becomes more restrictive. And so when we understand the answers to these questions, we better understand the character of God. And the more we understand what's important to God. Why does that matter? Well, there are things that are important to God that may not be important to us, but they should be important to us. And there are many things that are important to us that just simply are not important to God. How would we answer the questions that he asked in this psalm? Who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? What would you have said to those? Like, is there some kind of offering that we need to bring? Is there some kind of physical preparation that we need to make? Is there some kind of attendance record that you need to have for the festival days? Is there some kind of magic phrase that you need to say before you enter in? Let's look at what God gives as far as answers. There are 10 standards that God gives here. The psalmist gives for being in the presence of God. 3 negative, 3 positive, 2 negative, or excuse me, 2 positive, 2 negative. So 3 positive, 3 negative, 2 positive, 2 negative. And so there's a balanced approach. There's certain things we can be and need to be, and there's certain things that we cannot be and we shouldn't be. And so let's consider that as we go through this and look at some of these standards. Look at the very beginning. He who walks uprightly. Again, 3 positive here in verse 2. His lifestyle needs to be blameless. He needs to live upright. He has to have good character, good integrity. This idea of integrity means you're rock-like, that you don't break under pressure. It's the idea that what you do and say and believe kind of all comes together. It means you do the right thing even when nobody's watching. Then he goes on to define what walking uprightly means. It's the idea of working righteously or righteousness. And righteousness is this idea of doing what is right. To work righteousness means that you have the right standards to live by. And he uses God as a standard. He uses God's word as the standard in which he lives, as the standards of which he understands right and wrong. He has self-discipline to be able to do the things that is right and to keep himself from the things that are not right. Sometimes living righteously is a matter of deciding that that's just the way we're going to live. How many of us can think back to things that we did before and we thought, well, that's just not right. I didn't choose what was right. We need to choose rightly if we're going to dwell with God. Then he goes on to say that those who can dwell with God is the one who speaks truth in his heart. You think about how truth is looked at in our society. It's pretty much devalued. People go by what works instead of by what's true. How can I accomplish my goal? What can I do to persuade other people? What will keep me from suffering bad consequences? And then the truth just goes out the window. But we serve a God of truth. He's very concerned about truth. The only thing that he speaks is truth. And who's the father of lies? Satan. He was a liar from the beginning. Like, he's the one who lied to Eve in the garden, both twisting the truth and then telling a bold-faced lie at the end. So whose children are we? That's First John chapter 3, right? And then notice the person who dwells with God speaks truth where? He speaks truth in his heart. This means your heart and your lips have to measure up, and the truth has to be in our hearts and in our mouth. Lies don't just happen. They don't just start with our words. Lies happen in our hearts first. We lie because we decide we're going to be dishonest. We're certainly not honest with, we're certainly not honest with ourselves. And as a consequence, we're not honest with others. In Psalm 12, verse 2, he says, they speak idly, everybody with his neighbor, with flattering lips and a double heart they speak. We can speak out of both sides of our mouth. Double-hearted. We have the truth, and then we have what we say, which is different than that. Then he goes on to say in verse 3, he does not backbite with his tongue. There's 3 negative in verse 3. Integrity not only has implications for our own personal conduct, but it's also has implications for how we treat others. And so he doesn't backbite. He doesn't badmouth people. He doesn't try to run people down. There are times when you're not going to like somebody. And it's really easy for us to start talking negatively about them, talking evilly about them. And maybe you say something that creates some suspicions about someone. Start getting other people to start questioning them. That's backbiting. Like, that's saying things that's going to hurt people. And you can't dwell with the Lord if that's what you're doing. And he goes on to say he does no evil to his neighbor. It's not just a matter of what you say about them. It's a matter of what we do to them. It reminds me of what James talks about in James 3. He's talking about our lips, but he says, with it we bless our God, and then we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. He says, out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter out of the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus, no spring yields both salt and fresh water. You can't say you love God, then go around start beating up his people. Whether it's with your tongue or with your actions, you got to be consistent. If we're serving the Lord and loving the Lord, we've got to love his creatures. It's not okay to do evil to people. When we're irritated with them, when we've been hurt by them, we get frustrated and we get angry, we become bitter, and we attack. We do harm. But that's not the kind of person that dwells with God. He goes on to say, he who does not take up a reproach against his friends. Here's a person who doesn't accept slander against another. Is careful not to accept what everybody has to say about people. He realizes it's not fair. It's not fair to have our opinions sharpened by just one side of the story. Realize when people are gossiping, there's 2 sides to it. You have the person who's saying the things with their mouth. Then you have the person who's hearing the things and listens to the things. Gossip would be less tempting and less destructive if we just refuse to listen to it. And so if I want to dwell with God, I need to be careful in how I treat other people. Then he goes on to say in verse 4, he says, whose eyes a vile person is despised and honors those who fear the Lord. This is not a person who thinks very highly and wonderfully about other people, who are not doing what's right. We have this open-mindedness in our society. Instead, he has the same views, like this righteous person has the same views and the same mindset of God. God despises the wicked, and those who dwell with God, those who walk uprightly, they despise the wicked. It's the idea here that they don't make their heroes people whose character is not consistent with God. They don't glamorize wickedness. Man, is this a challenge for our society? Think about the people that we become enamored with. We become enamored with people who are rich, who have money, who have prestige and power. We like people who are bold and arrogant. Sometimes we're attracted to people just because they're showing off their bodies. And we're drawn to that because that's what we want to be. But if we want to dwell with God, we need to see wicked people the way that God sees them. We need to we need to look up to and honor godliness and humility and righteousness and modesty. You can tell a lot about a person by the things that they look up to. You really can. If we want to dwell with God, we got to see other people the way that God sees them. He goes on to say, "He who swears to his own heart and does not change." This is the idea. This is the idea that they keep their word. Like they say what they're going to do. We can really struggle with this. I've struggled with this sometimes. But this is the idea that even when it's costly for them, they do what they say they're going to do. In verse 5, which is the last verse here, he says, "He who does not put his own money at usury." That's the idea that he doesn't take advantage of others. When other people are in need, he's not thinking about what he can get out of it. He does what is right. He doesn't hurt people in need. He's generous to people who is in need. He doesn't do anything thinking he's going to get anything in return. He's a giver, not a taker. And that's the way it ought to be. He also doesn't take up a bribe against the innocent. You can't buy him. He's not thinking about what he's going to get out of a situation. He does what is right because it is right. He's not going to hurt those who are innocent. And then he goes on and he gives us a promise in this text. I'm not sure if I highlighted the promise. I don't see the promise there. But look at the last sentence there. "He who does these things shall never be moved." Here's the promise, that those who can dwell with God will not be moved. See, this is a promise of stability and security, the idea of divine protection, that it comes from God. And as you're dwelling with God, that means God is never going to allow you to be moved. I think that's really encouraging. If you think about all of these characteristics throughout this psalm, the ultimate fulfillment of them all, of one who can dwell with God, is Jesus. He's the one who has seen God and been with God in his presence. He's the very fulfillment of righteousness. And so all those characteristics describe him. And so what we need to do is, as we're thinking about who can dwell with God, we think about Jesus, and we need to seek to be more like Jesus. And so we're in the places that we fall short, we need to lean on him. He is our entrance into the very presence of God. We have passages in the New Testament that says we can come boldly to the throne of grace, Hebrews 4, that we can come into the very presence of God because of Jesus, because he is the one who can dwell in the presence of God. Because of him, we can come boldly before God. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your attention this morning. If you have any thoughts, comments, please make sure to comment down below. Please take this psalm and open it up throughout your day and give some thought, really meditate, ruminate on it as you go throughout the rest of your day. Think about, be challenged by it. Be challenged in your own character by it. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your attention this morning, and hope everybody has a great rest of their day. God bless.